the policy committee meeting for August 28th, and we'll start with introductions. And why don't we start in the corner with Kara?
Hi, Kara Bradshaw, Executive Assistant.
Rachel Lent, paralegal. Nice to see you again.
Mona McChesney. I'm a student at Benson. I'm not part of this. I'm just sitting.
That's okay, welcome.
Watching. Yeah.
Joining us.
Do we have a student rep?
Not yet. I talked to Frankie about it, but I don't know. Maybe we can ask Roseanne when we're done with the introductions. Go.
Michelle DePass, board member.
Eddie Wong, board member.
Julia Brim Edwards, board member and committee chair.
Liz Large, Contractor General Counsel.
Afternoon, Guadalupe Guerrero, superintendent. Almost the best dressed in the room. Almost.
Yeah, oh yeah,
Throwing it down.
almost close.
And we just finished introduction, so if you want to go ahead and.
I'm Mary Kane, Senior Legal Counsel.
Great. So we originally thought we might have perhaps any comment during the comment period on our first readings that we introduced last time, that we recommended at last time, but we haven't yet had them first read because we missed a meeting. So I'm assuming they're scheduled to be first read tomorrow night. Tonight. Okay. All right. And so we'll go to the next. On today's agenda, we have a number of different policies for consideration. We have an affirmative action that would have a name change, and also some revisions to the policy that's been brought forward. We'll go through that. Also one on class sizes. Then we have one that we carried over from last meeting on nutrition services, and an update from staff on that. And then two other policies that we had brought forward, that we're bringing forward just for discussion, and then public comment. And I'm noticing that there's no other business at the on the agenda.
On the updated one.
Oh,
Right, we added that other.
sorry, I printed out it before. So then we have other business, and then which I was just going to talk briefly about a policy that had been forwarded to us in June. So with that, I am going to ask staff to kick it off with an explanation of the recommended changes in the affirmative action policy.
Do you want me to do that? Okay. Yes, so we wanted to update this policy that hasn't been reviewed or updated since its inception and its initial adoption in 2013. There have been a number of changes. This was actually the review of it was sparked by some changes made in the last legislative session, including the change of the act, which is now the Educators Equity Act. So from that, we did a more thorough review of the policy and realized it was some of the processes that were contemplated in the initial policy are no longer part of the process with respect to our hiring process for teachers. So we wanted to update it to reflect current processes and the updated name of the Educators Equity Act upon which this is based.
So I'm going to ask, and if the committee is okay with this, for us to go through it just paragraph by paragraph about the deletions and the changes. And
Sure.
we can, because depending on the amount of consensus or questions, we can either go through it today and recommend it out for first reading, or we can pose questions or propose the changes and come back to the next meeting. But maybe that's the easiest way to see where the questions are, or the changes, if that's okay.
Sure.
I'll just note that Stacy Jung from HR is scheduled to be here. If there are questions, we'll need to save them. She's involved in some bargaining that's happening right now, and will just sent me an email right before the meeting, so you may be a little late. I think we can address most of them, but I want to just note that she will be joining us later for questions.
Right, she can answer some of the questions with respect to the processes we have in place now to have a more diverse workplace.
Would it make more sense to do the class size one because it may be easier? Or if you don't think it's too district,
I think either of it works, whatever is the pleasure of the committee.
do you want to do it all at one time when Stacy gets here and just move on to something else right now?
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay,
I just.
I'm sorry I didn't raise that earlier.
Yeah, that's okay.
Thinking she might walk in.
So there is class size guidelines, or it's called class size, and the proposed change would be class size guidelines and school staff allocations. It's policy 3.10.031. Currently, the current version just says the board directs the superintendent to determine school staff allocations and class size guideline for the district and to communicate that information to all district administrators. That was from 2002. And the addition I'm suggesting, which the superintendent does follow and does every year through the budget process and the staffing allocations, that adding an amendment that would add to that class size guidelines and school staff allocations for focus programs, focus schools, and dual immersion programs shall align with school staff allocations and class size guidelines for neighborhood schools. And just the background for that is prior to last year, the practice had been that principals had set the class size thresholds in those schools in which it was a lottery. And this is just saying that they need to be treated in neighborhood schools. So if our neighborhood schools have thresholds that are higher than what a principal decides is decided sort of unilaterally or for their own school, is this makes it more consistent, especially in places like Southeast or in some places in Northeast where there's a lot of focus programs that are in some ways competing with neighborhood schools.
So that's the problem that it's solving then, is to level the enrollment between focus option and neighborhood programs.
Yes, and
That's
it's not prescriptive in how to do that because there is an art and science to it. And Dr. Adams last year did some work to provide guidance to schools versus the principal of saying, I think our third grade should have X number of students.
Okay.
Do you have something you
Yeah,
want to say?
I would
about
add,
this?
I agree with the direction that school enrollments, class sizes, these should be centrally defined. The way that we communicate these to our school administrators and communities is through our annual core programming guide. So we will, of course, account for some programmatic considerations that we have to take, for instance, in immersion class, at certain grade levels, but the goal overall would be to make sure that class sizes, enrollments distributed in an equitable fashion as much as possible.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with, seems like a good direction, especially adding that protection for neighborhood schools, which I fully agree. Would there be any, I guess my question would be, do you foresee any like potential unintended consequences for this added language here, like in terms of handcuffing the decisions in a certain direction that may not be what's best?
Well, that's why the language isn't overly prescriptive of how to do it, because actually, this isn't a complete solve for it, because what often happens with immersion programs is the way our class size thresholds and guidelines are structured is the numbers are lower in kindergarten and then they get higher as the grades go up, and say up to fifth grade, the class size maximum is 34, or at 34 you get another teacher.
Yeah.
And it's not perfect because what happens in dual immersion, so they start out at the lower number, and as they get higher, generally what you see is attrition. So.
Mhm.
It's not a perfect solve for, because you still will have inequities of neighborhood schools saying, hey, we have 33 kids in our fourth grade class, and an adjacent, and a school nearby, which may have like high socioeconomic, high SES families with no free and reduced lunch, and yet they have much lower class sizes just because you can't add students in an immersion. So, but
Yeah, so.
it's try not to be prescriptive, but to like acknowledge that we should not be having artificially low levels set for non-neighborhood schools, and neighborhood schools basically getting them set for them.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly want to strive for not big disparities, but, you know, schools and immersion programs run into this phenomenon where as the years progress, there is some attrition. And if you're trying to join an immersion program in fourth, fifth grade,
Right.
like how can you meaningfully participate if you don't know Vietnamese, Russian, and your Spanish
Right.
at that level? And so how do you account for that?
Right, I mean, yeah, I know, we have first experience. Yeah.
And also that if you have, say, a focus program that has 15 students in 15 students in 2 classes, like they would get merged. I mean, theoretically, because that's the same standard for neighborhoods schools, unless you.
So those are the things that we look at every spring. Okay? Where does it make sense? Where is there efficiency? Where do we need to redistribute that staff, FTE, go to school that maybe is a little higher, that could use relief. We try to be as thoughtful as possible. I think we've been fine tuning it each year, but we're still left with this question. We should be setting those capacities, even if we're accounting for programmatic considerations to try to create as equitable optimal class sizes as possible.
Yeah, I guess that's my main, because I agree with the goal, because I mean, we need protections for our neighborhood schools in there. I just want to make sure that it seems like from what I'm getting at, this is more just like refocus the intention, being like, this is a priority, not necessary, like you said, prescriptive, not a prescribed fix.
Yeah, well, here's what happened. Before last year, focus programs, let's say Creative Science School or Odyssey.
Mhm.
They could say, we think the optimal number of students is 28. And so they had a maximum of 28. And then an adjacent neighborhood school, say Stevenson or Maplewood, near Odyssey, they're like, well, if 33 kids show up for 5th grade, we have to have, the district tells us like we have to put 33 kids in a class. And we had this other program where the school is setting basically their own class size limits and their own, and their own staffing levels versus the district setting it. So last year, Dr. Adams, and again, not to be prescriptive because there is a little bit of art and science to it, came up with a more equitable way to do it, so there wasn't just neighborhood schools having the higher class sizes.
So there was a
Okay,
little
that
bit
makes
more
more
of a
sense.
load up in the primary grades and the immersions where possible. That's sort of the only flag here on the language when it says shall align. Well, I may not be able to find 4 Japanese speaking 4th graders, so it may not align, but where possible, we need to do that.
But those are the allocations and guidelines too,
Yeah.
not the actual.
Okay.
Yeah, great. That makes a lot of sense.
Anything else, Director Hollins? Thank you for joining us.
Just observe.
Do we feel comfortable in moving it forward?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Then we'll move that one out. Just do another one?
Yeah.
Okay. So. The naming of school district properties. So this was, so you should have both a clean copy and a, red line copy. And I'm just gonna note that there actually is an error in the red line version. On number 4, it says the school board will take one of these actions, and then it has some language that's struck out.
Mhm.
This actually isn't in the original. That the language is struck is not, is actually not in the original policy. So if you look at,
It wasn't added to the red line. It
Yeah,
was
so
added
number
to the
4,
original.
yeah, so if you look between the new version and the revised version and the district policy, there is no number 4. So that was,
I think I might be looking at the wrong version.
okay, so you want to look at the one that says 1-4. Are you seeing the,
Maybe school district property. I have just the 2 attachments,
do you have this policy in, up?
the red line.
Mhm.
Yes, I do.
Okay, if you look at number 4, that should be
Yes.
all, that should be all new.
Yes.
And what I'm saying is the part that's struck out is actually isn't, it looks like it's
Looks like it's
eggs.
edited.
it looks like it's editing the original, but actually this whole paragraph is new.
The whole paragraph is new.
Yeah.
Okay, so,
So
I mean,
I'll walk through the changes. The changes essentially in this, there's 2 small changes. Let's see. So this policy was extensively worked in 2018, when we had a parent complaint about, the mascot for Franklin being a religious organization. And so we reworked this policy and updated it. It hadn't been updated since 2004. And made a number of changes. The primary change, there's one small change in number 3, and then there's an addition in number 4. So if you go to 1.3, just deleting the word every effort, because I guess what does that mean? And sometimes, Michelle, as you know, like, for example, when we got to the IW Wells mascot, at the meeting, something that even though lots of eyes had been on it, we ended up at the meeting withdrawing the mascot name that was being submitted and chose a different name.
Interesting.
back to the-
So every effort, I think it just seems like an overstatement, maybe.
yeah,
And then the addition to number 4 is the result of over the last 7 years, we've had a number of school communities have come and petitioned, or individuals who have petitioned for name changes. And sometimes they've gotten responses and sometimes they haven't. And so things keep cycling back to the board if I had to get a response. So this provides for a response, and then there's a one of 3 actions. And there's a very extensive AD that describes the process by which it goes through. We could decline the request. Or defer action on the request to a later. But that it provides some sort of initial response versus just going into the vortex of people not
not knowing what to do. Declining the request, do we want to lay out why? It seems kind of, do we want to lay out why we might not accept, why we might decline a request? Pardon? Well,
Oh, I see what you're
if
saying. Yeah,
there's a renaming, maybe like who gets to decide, I guess. If it's declined or for what reasons. Like
yeah. Right.
a school named after a racist historical character.
Yeah.
A community might come forth and you know, mention another name of someone that might be problematic.
The most common reason for declining a request that we've had in my 10 years is usually like lack of community support.
Mhm. It probably depends on who you ask, because we went through this with Jefferson several years ago. I think it was before I was on the board about renaming it, and there was a lot of dissension within the community, so within the community that was the Jefferson community.
Right, so for something like that, the board could choose option number 3, which is
Defer it to a later date.
I asked the superintendent to set up a process that to get a consensus on whether to change it or not, which is how we dealt with that request that came to our board meeting.
For
From
Jefferson.
2001 to 2005, every board meeting, we had a request to change the Jefferson name, but there was just one individual asking for it.
Oh, wow. Very adamant person, like literally everyone.
Cliff Walker, he's the one who also instigated. It's a long time Jefferson, he comes to all the Jefferson meetings.
Mhm.
And at that time, the response from the co-chair, who was a Jefferson grad, was that when you have a consensus among the Jefferson alumni community to move something forward, we'll do that.
Okay.
My assumption is if the board declined the request, they probably would give an answer, but I don't know that we need to put that in policy.
Mhm. I was just curious about that. Because it does depend on who's, you know, making that decision that's at the board. You know. Like, as you mentioned, there was a vice chair that was from that community that, you know, declined on behalf of the board. I was just curious if there was a set of criteria that we would use to make that decision as a board.
So the
Is it addressed in the AD? Which I don't have in front of me.
The school board decision making?
The decision making, yes, with that bullet point number 2 to decline the request.
The AD wouldn't tell the board what to do. The AD
Okay.
would instruct staff.
Okay, that's true. Thank you.
I just remember we had somewhere where it has broad. Support. The reason this is in here, and we could add reasons if you wanted, the reason it's in here is no response is not really, I mean, has been a de facto decline, and it's disrespectful to, I mean, in the past, we've had students bring things forward or community members, and it's like getting a response like, actually, no, we're not going to do that. We're already running 3 other processes, or pick the.
It's not a good time.
Or there's.
I think I understand it a little bit differently than the question I asked. And so that's just saying that there will be like a formal decline, some kind of a response.
Exactly.
It would either be one of the bullet points. Yes, we're going to direct the superintendent, or we're going to decline the request at this time. Okay, I like that. I like having a response, especially for community members.
I forgot there's one other change, but it doesn't look like it's showing up.
Can I ask you a question? Do those requests usually come into the board office, or how do they?
They come in a
Through a
variety of
board
ways.
members?
I mean, sometimes we get like student petitions, sometimes it's just a community member.
There's one example that I think that I had shared, I forwarded the board a couple times from a middle school that had a request. So we follow the process to forward to the principal to see if that person could take on that work and lead the community in that conversation. So we did respond. There was a response that said this is the process and directed them. So it didn't go unanswered.
Mhm.
That same group submitted a petition in, I think, 2018. And we also had one on Kellogg before the school got rebuilt that just basically nobody got responses. And I just think it's discourteous to community members if they, especially your students who, I mean, we're not always going to agree with them, but
Mhm.
they should,
This is directing a response.
one way or the other.
I'm for
There was,
Yes, well, but not yet. So what's being proposed here is that the board would hear the request and the board would decide, are we gonna proceed or not? That's the prerogative. If you're gonna choose to direct superintendent, then I'm gonna need some clarification because the reason we try to make these teachable moments for the community, and they definitely involve a lot of coordination and organizing, mostly on the part of the principal and all the other stakeholders that are involved there. There might be an individual who went to the school 20 years ago. Right now, the school community is focused on something else. Not that they don't disagree, we should look at the name, but they want to have a process about it. And so we don't have a capacity internally to do it. If we're going to make this something that we want to open up, we could easily end up with 10 of these for the coming school year. That's going to require a resource, you know, to be able to coordinate that many processes, which the principal may not be prepared to sort of lead. It's coming, there might be a new principal, they might have other things going on. So, you know, I would want to have a discussion about that. You know, we can proceed with it, but then we're gonna have to put resources behind it, you know, in order to do a meaningful job, if it's a priority.
well, I would expect that, but what I would say is that since 2018, Lane has asked for a name change. Community members, both community members and students, and lots of students. And because of a variety of things, it didn't happen. And then we also had, like I say, a request around Kellogg that never got responded to. And in the meantime, other like Wilson, and it's a value judgment of like who is worse, Woodrow Wilson or Joseph Lane. I mean, I would pick Joseph Lane, but the Wilson one went ahead, so resources were spent. So from my perspective is everybody deserves a response, and I feel like especially school communities that don't have a lot of political and social capital of getting a response of one way or the other. And we could add in here, Guadalupe or Superintendent Guerrero, if you wanted something that, you know, you would lay out whatever the resource request is, or sequencing. You have a new principal of like, we'd like to start this in the spring versus the fall. I mean, to me, it's designed to be high level, but certainly district capacity could be taken into account. I mean, we also had, you know, Benson's name change kind of leapfrogged over the Lane community as well, and it was mainly around just the change in, from my understanding, the changes in principles, but also it just never got started.
So is the process following the AD process, which is pretty complicated and requires a lot of community, school community input. Is that what delayed it at Lane?
But that AD process was just from last year. For three years ago, they asked for a change and submitted a petition as well, before it was the principal. I think Superintendent Guerrero, if you would like us to add something with some parameters about what we would need to consider in terms of if we're directing you to do it, we can
Yeah,
add that
because
language.
I would want us to manage the broader community's expectations, like if it's everybody, if we're just gonna form a queue, right, and a renaming coordinator to be named can do one every 3 to 6 months, then, you know, there'll be some criteria to determine the order necessary.
Okay,
Can I ask-
we haven't, go ahead, Director Holmes.
So I'm looking at the piece, so one, I don't think this is just me. I don't see the relevance of the board hearing this first. But even if we did this, if the superintendent is going to conduct a renaming process, well, wouldn't that kick it back to the AD anyway? And then whether the community groups are there or not there?
Yeah, what's happened is, if you look at the AD, first of all, it doesn't have the board being the final arbiter of the decision, because sometimes it just never even gets to the board. And frankly, I think communities who bring something forward deserve a response. And if the response, say for example, if the response went first to the superintendent said no, then it's removing the responsibility. It's for the naming for the Board of Education.
Yeah, when I look at it, it just seems really managerial.
It seems
It does.
Like overreach.
it's
Not necessarily, it just seems managerial, and I guess I'm thinking if we're gonna really be an efficient board, like. I guess I just see. Every 2 or 3 years, students or whoever wants to change the name of the school. If it's just as simple as going to talk to the board and the board said, okay, superintendent. Start the process. It seems like this could be a process for every few years that could happen, depending on the community at the time. And so I guess I just see this more as a managerial piece for them to be able to manage that versus it coming to the board to kind of to manage that, just my thought.
so this was the process, and we had school communities that never got responses. Or staff deciding not to move ahead with the process, or we've got literally Lane has been waiting for 5 years.
I know, but Lane.
Okay, well,
I change the AD.
Pardon?
And we look at how we.
We don't change the AD. We only have. The AD is a staff. Is the staff implementation of the policy.
But we can direct them to change the AD, right?
Well, that wouldn't be, that's then getting into
That's
management.
just the current policy, so if you want a different kind of AD, then you gotta offer clarification on the policy, which is, I think, what's being.
Actually, as the person who wrote the policy, I think the current AD, and you and I have spoken about this, is I don't think the current AD is reflective of what was the intent of the policy, because it essentially has staff not moving forward on name changes on their own decision making.
Yeah, like I think I agree with you with the problem. And I see where we're trying to solve. It'd be helpful to maybe define like a threshold for what it means when we have community request for changing a name. Like versus like, one person coming up versus like an actual, like you have 80% of the parents who are like not happy with this name, right? Like some kind of threshold that we could define that would automatically push it to
Instead of just like a random.
right. It's that way it would push Lane to the front because they've been requesting it for 5 years. But we don't have to worry about someone who doesn't agree with IW Wells anymore. 2 or 3 people.
You have to figure out how you define that community engagement, right? Like
Exactly.
80% of the, how do you quantify that, right? How do you quantify this 80% of the piece? I hear, and I hear your frustration about Lane, and I think, it seems like we're making a policy decision about one school versus the governance over all the districts. I guess for me, if this is about Lane, maybe we just make an action about Lane
It
specifically.
happened with Kellogg too,
Yeah.
I'll just say, and I'm gonna just stick up for Southeast Portland.
Oh, you're gonna go
And
Southeast too.
so it's sort of like it happened twice to 2 middle schools with very little socioeconomic clout. And they did come with a bunch of students and staff. So I would, I think that could make sense and be a bigger filter to. That could be a filter versus like one person, so it's not just somebody randomly, so.
It
say for-
triggers an action. I like what you mentioned, Betty, because it triggers action.
Yeah.
For example, so I think that's worthwhile to add another filter. But if you deferred the action, and another thing would be defer action that requested later date, like you don't have enough community support, or this seems like a total one-off.
It's the tricky part, right?
Do you want to,
Propose something.
you don't have to do it right now,
I'll think about it, because I think, it would make sense if there was some kind of petition process or like how do you define like what it means when a good chunk of the community is requesting a name change? Right? How do you make situations like Kellogg and Lane be able to step forward automatically? But then you don't have to add more managerial load because we have like random people requesting all,
it's a totally different way to do it. And this is what a lot of other big public institutions did in 2016 to 2020, was they actually set up basically a group of not historians, but experts. So for Oregon State as an example,
Mhm.
they set up a group, they commissioned them, like, look at all our names. And they basically prepared a report on all the names. I mean, some of them were just, like 2 paragraphs. And there were like 3 or 4 names which Oregon State didn't want to have associated with its buildings. I mean, one of them being Benton County. Or there's a hall named Benton, but after, it's also the same person that Benton County is named after. And so then you narrowed it down to, so this is just a different way to, and I'm not suggesting it, but just a different way to do it versus like the one-offs.
Yeah, I like that.
Well,
idea.
and also, like-
I think it brings people together to do that.
I suggested it, and we could,
Yeah.
I mean, you could have the Oregon Historical Society, because Carrie Timchuk has offered already just, provide a whole host of resources, but basically they came back with 3 names. And we did not change, for example, Benton Hall, because we said we were naming it after the community members of Benton County. And then the other 2 we renamed, and the U of O, and you could look up online, U of O did a very similar process that.
University of Hawaii, lots of our academic higher ed, they have the process down really well.
And they didn't
Even
come up
Lewis and
with
Clark.
a lot. I mean, so I think U of O had 2 or 3. And they changed them, and then Oregon State had a similar number out of something like, I don't know, 30 or 40 buildings. So that's just a different way to proceed. This is more of a one-off, but they basically gathered a bunch of experts. It wasn't like a district staff, like it wasn't OSU staff that did it.
Mhm.
It were people who knew about the more historical.
And I guess I like that idea more. I think it gets, and then you can have the communities that's in those people, community members actually take part in that as well. And then, they can take ownership in that as well. Versus, I just worry about this going to the board piece, because I just see us having conversations more about what we're going to name schools. And I'll be honest, I think a lot of times naming the school is just a superficial act that doesn't really get to the systemic racist structures that have put those in place. Right. And so
I agree. with that.
I love the fact that, we talk about changing them, but I just don't want to get bogged down with board work, with having 4 or 5 people come up, or even 4 or 5 communities come to, we want to change the name, we want to change the name, we want to change the name. And we veer off from the actual work of the students to looking at, talking about this stuff all the time. Or
If we rejected them all, that would be one thing, but I'll just say the fact that IWB Wells, a very affluent, not a very diverse community,
It's pretty
change-
diverse.
not at all compared to Lane. I mean,
Not
just if you look at the
compared to
demographics, and it's not from a
Or Jeff.
socioeconomic standpoint.
Mhm.
Or Kellogg. So
Yeah, I mean,
I'll just say the current practice has resulted in the schools with the least amount of political capital and socioeconomic capital of being heard.
so I don't know, I'm thinking about
Hmm.
Madison. Yes.
How did Lane get skipped over 5
No,
years?
I-
He's
no,
named
I-
after the
I think-
worst.
Well, we can do, there's a lot of buildings and stuff, artifacts that's named after folks that, historically is not acceptable now, but how can we, if it's this about Lane and Kellogg, right? How can we just focus on those 2 schools and have a focuses on, hey, let's look at renaming those 2 schools?
Because I've raised this several times over the last 5 years, and the answer has basically, the community has had no response. And then like last year it got started, and then it's like, oh, the process we have, actually, it's all driven by the principal. So the fact that the principal keeps changing also has, so that also has an impact.
But now that we know that these are issues, right? I mean, I wasn't here 5 years ago, so I don't know. But I'm just thinking now that the fact that we have different folks on the board, right? Now, maybe we can't just stay focused on, because there is change in community with the regular principal led process. Well, maybe we can now say, you know what? Superintendent, we need you to go ahead and start the renaming process for Lane and Kellogg.
Okay, that's what this exactly says.
But I have a problem with this in the policy, because I don't want, so for instance, if business kids, 2 years from now, want to name it from Astros to, I don't know.
And we can,
Rubik Cube, yeah,
but Gary, we can decline the request.
But I don't think that's a board issue. I mean, at
Well,
that level, as far as just.
You tell me how you're gonna solve for schools that don't have any socioeconomic capital, who are being ignored by the process, what their solution is. Because I've been assured for 3 years, 4 years, that something will happen and nothing has happened. So I think it's disrespectful to our school communities who come and petition to get no response.
Well, and maybe we make sure that staff make sure they respond. But I'm hearing more, how we fix how we deal with it now, right?
We're talking
deal
about-
with it now, as far as, so, and we can have the board say, so we need to.
We can
look
pass a
at that.
resolution on Lane and Kellogg if you want to,
There you go.
but the issue is also,
Well, you want to know what happens for the next time. a Southeast
right,
school
and I feel
comes
it's
in.
disrespectful to school communities, and school communities who most often get ignored are the ones.
You're preaching to the choir. I hear you, and I agree with you. I don't think it needs to be this point. I think it needs to be more of, how do we as a board dictate, say, hey, staff, we need to make sure we get a response to those folks one way, and if that doesn't happen, then as a board, we can say, you know what, this has gone on long enough. The principal driven process is not working, because we change the principles every 2 or 3 years. So by the time they do get some momentum going, and all of a sudden, well, then maybe at that point, say, you know what, this has been happening. We need to take a different approach. Now we do something different. I guess I just see this getting bogged down.
So what you're describing though is like the board can't, what you just said is the board will tell the superintendent to respond. Is like the board can only do that in a board meeting, in official action, because none of us individually have the authority to tell the superintendent to do something or to respond to
Right,
something.
I mean, that's what I said, the board, you say, hey,
Well,
I feel
this is
like,
exactly what this is doing.
but no, this is how us respond, not superintendent responding.
well, I think there's like a fundamental or like whole, or, it's a common problem with a lot of districts, right? Which is loudest voices
Yeah.
issue, right? I mean, that's just fact of life. I mean, everyone struggles with that. Would it be helpful? I mean, I think an ideal solution would be something that doesn't increase the workload on our central office. At the same time, it filters, the stuff that we don't need to be looking at. But like, I hear what you're saying, like you're creating more workload or maybe even bogging down taking time away from like real work that needs to be done. But I think you're addressing the most important issue. There is a core systemic issue, which is, the loudest voices effect, or some places are getting more attention than others. Would it be helpful to, I mean, I'm just brainstorming, but like, there's a lot of people in our community that would love to partake in like the experts of renaming schools and stuff like that, like having something similar to like the CVRC or something, maybe like Southeast Guiding Coalition, don't go there, right? But like, like a committee of community people who like are the experts of naming, that requests can go through them, and they would be the ones that write. I'm just brainstorming about ideas of.
I like that idea. I think maybe we have something that says that we look at names maybe every 5 or 7 years.
Because
Right, so that way those schools that are not getting heard, it will be looked at, because we're looking at the whole thing in totality, right? So now everybody gets looked at.
I suggested it 5 years ago, and
Well, let's make it happen now then.
So I just want to,
I'm with you.
I'm getting text from people. So there was in November of last year, a meeting where the PPS representative was attending a meeting to talk about it. On June 13, 2023, there was a letter to the Lane community saying that it will happen. I was not involved in these, so I don't have a lot of deep knowledge, but I think it has taken time, but there has also been some interaction with the community on this.
So my understanding
gonna-
is that Lane is slated to occur this fall. They were first on deck. And I believe that that's been communicated to the school community. Of course, we have a new principal there. We'll make sure to reiterate that if we get the school opening, that their turn's up.
But we need to fix because like. It's been 6 years that this is, and I feel like, oh, we're just gonna fix, if we just fix it for Lane. It doesn't get after the core issue, which is school communities. That come to the board. And our policy has the board has the sole responsibility of. Naming schools or renaming it, is that a communication that happens, a year after almost, they were promised last year it was going to happen and then it didn't happen, but it also was something students raised. Frankly, those students are now in high school.
I think we should invite those students in and it sounds like it's happening now for Lane. And then do we need to solve for Kellogg? Like, I like your idea about setting a time to consider every few years. I don't know about every 7 years, but I'm also wondering how often this will be coming up.
Well,
2020, everybody wanted to rename everything after George Floyd.
I don't think there's that many more that we're going to frankly rename. Or that we know that.
Well, there might be in the future. We just
But
don't
we don't know
Yeah,
because
predict.
it's suggesting that any individual could say, I don't like the name of this one, or
Yeah,
I really
Well,
love
and
my
that- and
grandma.
that
and I
probably
want
if
to
it
be
had-
named after her.
If it had no historical basis for why we would accept it, we wouldn't just change the name of the school.
Sure, I don't think you're. I hope we're not making assumptions about my leadership core values or this administration's not wanting to always take a critical look at our most underserved communities, because I think we've taken and shown evidence over the last 6 years of that. There have been other things that have been happening that our limited capacity as an administration has been focused on. We know that this is one that's been on deck, that it's one we need to make right. There's lots of schools that we shouldn't be honoring people that there, but it's partly like we've said from the beginning, we could be like other school districts and say, here's 10 names we're going to change tonight, and these are the 10 new ones. We took a different approach. We said we're going to make this a real teaching, educational opportunity, and that to do that well, we wanted to support that and make it educational and do the background and do the history. And you've heard our students show up and talk about that process. It was very meaningful for them to land at the recommendation that they could share ownership and feel good about. And we want that to be the case with each of the schools that we want to look at. So if it's not going to be the principal that's coordinating this, because, I'm going to need a renaming team,
You don't need
to do these, depending on how many we're contemplating taking on.
I don't see that you need a renaming team because there haven't been that many requests, but when we get a request, it seems like it seems like they should get a response from. They should get a response, and if it gets rejected or just not dealt with, it should go to the board should be making that decision because we're the final arbiter of whether or not a school name change happens. And so what's happened in the past is and even the way the AD is written, actually the AD is written, the principal could, or the principal supervisor could decide not to move ahead. And that is, to me, then having actually a staff person make a decision that we're not moving ahead.
No, it's clear you would like the board to make that decision versus a principal who maybe it's their first year, they got 10 of the things they're trying to focus on that year. But if the board wants to say, irrespective of that, superintendent, we want you to support this school with the process. And I'm saying, okay, that'll require some resource and we'll have to work around the other work that school community may be focused on. But we can do that so long as, we don't inundate, with requests to do that in any given school year.
I'm gonna make a suggestion. maybe, Eddie, you could think of some potential filters, so there's not a whole bunch of requests. Superintendent Guerrero, if you have, parameters or things you think the board should consider, whether it's timing, resources, you do it that way. In the meantime, maybe Director Hollins, we could have an offline discussion. I can share with you the U of O and the OSU process that you can see what that looks like, and you can see if that's an alternative approach. I will just say on the broader look, I wouldn't recommend having just regular community members like for the initial cut, because the initial cut is who historically these people are. I mean, obviously you'd want a diverse group of historians or people who understand, but it's not so much like, hey, we'd just like to rename our school, but is there a reason for renaming our schools? I mean, Lane students have said they don't even like calling their school Lane because of who Joseph Lane was. And so that's like a different approach. So
I think I like that. And the reason why I like that, because it don't have to just always be because of somebody's, it's historic downfall, right? It could also be when we want to celebrate somebody else new, right? But I love that idea as far as let's look at how we can bring academia together, whoever historians together, because like I said, I think it don't always have to be, we're trying to get rid of negative, thinking we can't be insinuating a positive too. And we want to honor, like we did the prophecy, we want to honor someone as well. And I think that I would be love to have that off-record conversation.
I'll also say the level of communication between staff and the board has not been very robust. So for example, about the whole Lane process. So whatever we decide, having the board know what the process is. So if it's being delayed or it's not going to happen, that there be more communication, because that is like I say, when the petition comes to the board and then it doesn't happen as a reflection.
Sure, we can run a tighter process with a dedicated staff. That is true.
I feel like number 4, 1.4 is actually kind of two sentiments. Number 1 is that the issue of like kind of respecting these people who are coming to petition for a name change is a timely response. Right, so like the request for naming properties by individuals, it should be a timely response. One of these responses, right, in a timely manner. But then the school board is also a separate. I feel like it's a separate thing.
The timely response from the district
It could be
administration.
from the district, and then maybe the school board, it could take one of these actions. The district can direct a decline request, or should, or may refer to a school board.
Yeah, one of the issues I have with the district declining the request is that actually then that is a decision not to rename, and that actually the decision on naming is the board's to do.
Okay.
But you could divide it in two. So if you want to come up with two
Right.
potential
Yeah, thanks.
pieces.
Homework.
Are we ready for affirmative action?
Stacy is here. So Mary's gonna walk through the changes in a little more detail, and Stacy is here to provide technical advice on data. Practices. Questions at that time.
Sure. So the first paragraph, as I mentioned, this policy is reflective of state law regarding the diversity in workforce statute. And so the first changes is language that is pulled directly from the statute. As I mentioned earlier, the act is now called the Educators Equity Act. And so that's that first purple section. And I took out the old language, and We also took out the language in the first paragraph that directs the superintendent to create and implement an affirmative action equal opportunity plan. This may have been established at the time, but it's not in existence now, and the district has within HR, and Stacy can talk about that, a diversity protocol, and had a diversity workforce protocol, and it's on our webpage, but I'll let Stacy talk a little bit about that. Oh, and I can also add what we have added to in I think what was what that original plan was to do was to be reported back to the board of what gains we had made or what progress we were making. And so we have, because we've removed that language, we have added, it's on page 2 and the second paragraph, that the district shall provide an annual report to the board, see what how we are making gains on that promise. Stacy, do you want to talk about the programs within HR that
I have
support this action plan? Oh, sorry.
I have a question about, I just have it highlighted here on my copy about, I'm just curious why we removed the number of minority teachers, including administrators employed by school districts and educational service districts shall be approximately proportionate to the number of children. Is it just the use of the word minority?
That was the old language. I took the old language out and
The proportionality is the piece I was curious about. It seems like we would want to still want to aim for some
I think if you look above that, it talks about
proportionate.
in a manner that reflects the percentage of diverse students in the public schools of the state.
trying to get at the same language
Right,
idea.
it's different language with the same idea that sits just above that deletion.
I guess on that, yeah, I saw that also above. If we want to mirror the population in the state, or do we want to, because the state overall has a very low African-American population, and Portland, of course, has a higher number of African-American folks.
Yeah, as I said, I was.
So
quoting
if we're
directly from-
mirroring the state, proportion, we're looking at 0.06.
So you're just saying, Michelle, you would drop the of the state? And so you just
let's
have
see.
to reflect
I
the
did
percentage
not-
of diverse students in the district?
I mean,
And we have two concepts there.
I can see it causing some trouble. I mean, because like the
It's an or.
there's like a generational
It's an
lag
or.
in terms of diversity, right? Like our younger kids are way more diverse than us.
Yes.
And so like teachers, if you're trying to employ all these teachers and 99% of them are white, right? Like there's almost no way you can achieve that goal. I mean, so I feel like, I I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying like, that's the kind of problem I can foresee happening, and that like, what if it's binding you to hiring maybe not the best candidates? Because I think there should be some things where we're pushing or recruiting, and that I think I like that. But I can see the problem because of that kind of generational lag and our diversity numbers.
I think that's why the languages shall strive to. Strive is in looking at, it's creating those educational opportunities that will bring in more diverse applicants. I think that, and again, I'm going to turn to Stacy about what that looks like. It's about bringing more applicants to the table so that we do get the best. We can have both, right? So we can have
Right.
the both things. They're not mutually exclusive.
I have a statistic to share. So 80% of people over 50 are white. And then 50% of people under 50 are not white. And so there is that generational and a demographic lag. But we still have, if we're looking at people under 50, we would be hiring people that are coming out of college. We still have a larger pool than we would have had 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
That's nationally, not just Portland.
That's national.
Right.
It's mirrored in Portland as well.
Yeah.
So, I have all kind of issues with this. one, when we
You-
talk about.
Can I just suggest something? Let's catalog them. So if you could go through it section by section, what your issues or questions are.
And then send them in or,
No, just go ahead, go through them,
Oh.
just to make sure that like, when you start talking about a section, just tell us what sections it's in so we can.
so, we'll start with the. Right under affirmative action employment. Actually, let's start with page one, educators equity. What did that mean? Are we talking about gender equity? Are we talking about LGBTQ equity? Are we talking about race equity? What kind of equity are we talking about? The issue I have with this is because equity is just so ambiguous that it forgets the fact that we're talking about race. And if we're doing that, then that's like we're erasing race. Like it's not there anymore. Because equity could be that income equity for, students whose parents have money or not money. What equity are we talking about?
Well, the state looks at a number of different protected classes, and we also have that within our 180-020 policy, where we talk about those protected classes, which include race, but it also includes gender, gender identity, religion. It's noted in the language that you see in the first paragraph in the equal employment opportunity section is the language that comes from our current policy 180-020. So that is what we're talking about.
Okay, so we're no longer
Yes,
talking
in that
about the
section.
Minority Act piece, where we're talking about specifically teachers of color. This
Correct.
Could be,
Yeah.
now we need gay teachers, now we need,
Right.
disability teachers. So we just got rid of all the other stuff. We're just adding all this other stuff as equity. So that means we're erasing equity from us. Because in that case, if we talk about like,
Yeah.
say, so we're superintendents, so it's just superintendents equals the portion of the students as well. And that's what I have a problem with this
Yeah.
equity piece, because it
Yeah, I
like
understand.
it erases what the intentionally act was in the beginning.
So I I don't know the intent when it was drafted, Director Hollins. I think the first section,
The Minority Teacher Act.
no,
Oh,
policy that we are amending. So the first section does, I think, speak to race. The second, equal employment opportunity, was part of the existing policy. We can take it out and put it elsewhere. That's equal employment opportunity is a broad statement that applies across lots of protected classes and has for a long time. So it's
that, yeah.
not trying to, it's an and, not a grab, if you will. And it's not trying, I don't think it's trying to dilute, but we could maybe make that cleaner, or we could move it elsewhere.
Yeah,
But it
I mean,
was-
I'm not talking about, I understand the Equal Employment Act, I get that. I'm talking about, from the Education Equity Act versus the Minority Teacher Act. And we talk about when you dilute it, that's exactly what we're doing is that we're not no longer talking about educators of color, now we're talking about education equity.
I think we were talking about a diverse, a more diverse educator population that reflects the population of our students as well. It's
But it-
more reflective. of-
But it starts with, I mean, the policy still starts with to close the racial achievement gap. Portland Public School staff must reflect the diversity of the students, and it references the racial education equity policy. Again, we can make it more, I think the intent is not to dilute it, even though the legislature changed the name of the act. But the policy, the board here owns how we talk about that, and then the intent was to update it to reflect the current act language. But no one changed that recitation of racial achievement gap, racial education equity policy. I mean, I think that was at least the intent of the edits, but I want to this is the board gets to help craft and strengthen. So we are.
I like the word minority being changed out, because we're actually the global majority, people of color are. But I think maybe it would go further to be more explicit about that, because I have that same sentiment that when you don't explicitly call something out because you're trying to be polite and inclusive, it can have the effect of seemingly being erased if it's not specifically called out.
Is it? I guess I'm confused. Director Hollins, are you talking about the Oregon Equity Act? The name of that, or just the way it's said here? Isn't the Educator Equity Act that was just passed like this year,
Yes.
right?
Well, it was revised, and it was originally called the Minority Teachers Act. So that's, and then they revised it and updated the language and the
Right.
title.
And they had those definitions in the Educators Equity Act, right? And so I guess, should we also be including that in here just to be like direct and forward about it?
Yeah,
It's
I
like
think we
kind
should
of-
be direct. I think we need to call out what it is. I just have a problem with the system and to dilute or, you know, what it is that we're actually really trying to do. And I think I think we need to be an example of, no, we're not going to follow the status quo, right? We're actually going to do what we feel is best, right? And when you start looking at, and it's not just this, it's the Supreme Court, it's, you know, certain laws that's happening. If we are going to be really a different organization, right? We have to do things totally different. And this, I feel this is just keeping with the status quo
I see what you're saying, yeah.
of how the system is trying to change and I don't know,
I like that sentiment. It's like PPS, we should be the leaders, set the example, right? Not just follow the law.
I'm
think
also
the-
noticing a trend in, getting rid of equity departments and removing language, and, we don't need equity committees anymore, and, we're already there, and so I think it is important to, in this time in history, to be explicit.
I don't think anybody would argue that, yes, we need diverse, inclusive workplaces, but we can't lose the explicit emphasis on engaging in efforts that increase educators of color being in our classrooms and
Yes.
all other. So we just want to make sure that also comes through as the main goal.
Mhm. And I'm curious to hear some of the things that we're doing. I've heard some of them, but would love to.
So related to that, I see a sentence that's been added in the first paragraph at the end. The superintendent's budget shall incorporate diverse workforce goals provided in this policy. I think what it's trying to say is superintendent will incorporate strategies that
And fund
action
them.
steps
And
that
fund them.
fund them
Yeah.
to be able to have strategies and actions implemented.
Stacy, can I lean on you at this point?
Stacy Jung, Senior Director of Operations. We, through the strategic plan this last couple of years, we've been focused on the diverse, high quality, thriving workforce strand in the strategic plan. We did a partnership with Education Northwest this last school year using the House Bill 4030 funds to do an environmental scan, where we looked at the life cycle of PBS employees to better understand some best practices where we can improve, and started to get recommendations back on that. So we're looking at how we utilize that information to build a plan going forward. So looking at things like evaluating and envisioning our entire attraction and recruitment process, building out recruitment plans, seeking and establishing pipelines and partnerships with our HBCUs, strengthening our relationships with current local universities to build student teacher pipelines, with the Wallace Foundation that we're leaning into, and the work for the principal pipelines there. One of the things that we heard from the environmental scan was onboarding and how that supports new educators, new employees, and how we build that more sustainably across the board will also help with retention and looking at some reimagining wellness plans and thinking about our kind of retention and also our separation
How have, or at least since I've been on board, how has our initial recruitment and retention, how has that been going for the last few years?
I think all of it has been trends in the right direction. We are looking at providing data. I think Sharon said October 1st, in alignment with the student enrollment timing when they release student enrollment, pulling that data forward to take a look at how we're doing in comparison to our students and actually match that. And then we can look at the trends from year to year.
We don't know which that is.
I don't have it off the top of my head. We have some data that I do not have ready for right now.
Dr. Hans, we, staff would be happy to take back that first part of the whole committee, the first part of the policy and try to draw out very more explicitly about race. I think Director Wong, your reference to the statutory definitions, Mary and I've been over here looking at these, was also add, they're including, it's not an entire definition, it's diverse.
It means culturally or linguistically diverse characteristics of a person, including origins in any of the Black racial groups of Africa, but it's not Hispanic culture or origin, regardless of race, origins in any of the original peoples of the Far East, Southeast Asia, the Indian subcontinent, or the Pacific Islands, origins in any of the original peoples of North America, including American Indians or Alaska Natives, or a first language that is not English.
So that apply, that's the law, and
You can incorporate that into, or at least, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead, finish.
I was gonna say incorporate that into the paragraph for clarity.
But it's also, I want to be sure, I know what we're hearing also includes the law is the floor, not the ceiling. Right? So we at least comply with the law, but do we do some things over and above that, legally compliant and perhaps more bold?
Right.
So
Yeah, that would be nice. Like that.
Yeah, I would like to see what that looks like. And also when we went from, I actually got out of it, but they said, no, the minority teacher act said we must get there, and now we should strive to get there. And I think to me, that's like if we're going backwards. So we go from saying we're going to do something, oh no, we try to do something.
So the success is in the trying,
Right.
not in
and
the
then actually
actual
doing it.
demonstration.
Right. I think I have an issue with that. I think if we're really striving to be the leaders in education, that we're trying to strive for us to get to that top 5, school district in the country, right? We don't try to get there. Well, our goal is to get there, right? Our goal is to eliminate, not try to eliminate, that's, to me, that's an easy way out of something. If we say we're going to diversify our staff of other, do it, right? Not what we're going to strive, because then the accountability is, oh, well, this is what we tried to do, this is what we tried to do, or well, we made that not what we are going to do. That's like me saying, I'm gonna strive to pay you. I'm gonna strive to give you your paycheck. Right? Yeah, that probably wouldn't go too well, in the interview, right?
Yeah, I'll do my best.
Yeah, I'm gonna do my best, right? So I think as we look at this policy, I think we need to really be really intentional, like we have been. I think we need to be the leaders like we have been. And if that means, standing against the status quo that's out there, then that's what we do. Change don't come easy, change don't come, easy and soft, and it comes with intentionality. And I think if we really are talking about, who we are as a district, and we need to be intentional. Sorry for taking over, I'm just sorry.
we're happy to take that back. It's really helpful feedback. And a revised version.
And that would be like the intro.
That would be the intro and any other conforming pieces in the equal employment opportunity again is a related but different section. And we would we would find the other, there was a lot of redundancy. It was repeated in the first part and the third part, so we tried to streamline it, so we would. But we would look at all of it and not try to do it here in the middle, we would tell you exactly where it is, but we want to make sure.
But if there are other aspects in, other than the first paragraph that you'd like us to revise.
Let's keep
pretty much
the
it.
questions coming while we have all the
Oh,
relevant staff here.
okay. Well, I don't want to take up too much time, but for instance, when we took out the board shall further direct the superintendent to designate an affirmative action officer. What did that, I don't know, what did that mean? Did that mean that we're not focusing on that anymore? Or is there a different office?
On page 2, so the board is designating CHRO to oversee compliance with and commitment to the practices and this policy. So that's,
So it's, once again, that takes out that into the intentionality, saying, well, the chief. Human resource officer, which that's their job as far as any way to recruit and hire folks. So it kind of takes away the. Yeah, just.
Director Hollins, I
I'm
didn't
sorry.
realize how late it was. So what I'm gonna ask is that you share any questions or comments
Okay.
to all the committee, but nobody and the staff, but nobody respond back, so we don't have a public meeting, but so that we understand what your questions and concerns are, and we can work through it the next committee meeting. And I'm only putting a pin in it because I know we have 2 people who have signed up to speak public comment, and we have 2 minutes each. And also, I want to also just briefly, we had another agenda item, well, 2, school initiation closures. And on that particular policy, I've added some language which makes clear that closing a neighborhood program would require a school initiation and closure report. Neighborhood schools are closed, the same school programs are closed, they're treated the same way as school. And then in addition, but we can talk about more about that the next meeting, the nutrition services, did you confirm that all the items that are currently in the policy are already in federal law or state law?
I did not, but these 2 did.
Federal and or state law.
So
yes.
that everything in there, like the meal shaming, the board setting the price of school lunch, that's all in federal law. So there's no
Or state law.
or state law, and so we don't need to have a policy.
We don't need to have a policy.
Okay,
With that, is the committee okay with rescinding it? Do we need a policy that just restates state law and federal law?
no. So the meal shaming piece, do we still charge fees though?
It's not, and it's not allowed.
Okay, it's not allowed. I didn't get that from reading it because I skimmed it really fast today.
Yeah, that's my big question about it too. Yeah.
We okay with recommending rescinding it?
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
it's already in state. federal law. Okay, so we do that. With that. Kara, you signed up for public comment, so come on up to the main table, and you have 2 minutes.
Suzanne Clark. Yeah. Hi, I'm Suzanne Clark, CLARKE. I'm a member of the Reform PBS Funding Group and a Roosevelt High School parent. Parent of a student at Roosevelt High School. I'm here today to express our group's gratitude that the policy committee is continuing its interest in reforming the local school foundation policy. After 3 years, I'm sure that we're all feeling a little bit stuck on this. So at the request of the committee chair, our group spent the weekend working on a draft policy that was emailed to all of you and Chief of Staff Jonathan Garcia. We hope this draft policy lends clarity on how we can bridge the gap from where we are now and where we'd like to be as a district in regard to foundation fundraising for FTE. As our group has stated in prior public comment, we believe new policy would be the product of community collaboration during a transition period.
Therefore, our draft policy recommends the following. The board will establish a working group of community members to prepare a transition plan to implement a district-wide foundation. The working group will review and determine if existing foundation relevant policies should be replaced, revised, or repealed. After 3 years of deliberation, we feel it's mandatory to include in our draft policy a sunset clause that terminates the current role of local school foundations and LSF fundraising June 30th, 2024. Our group is eager to meet with any or all of you before the next policy committee meeting to answer questions about our draft policy, so efficient and constructive discussion can occur at the next meeting. And because we hope that this committee can move our policy forward to the full board for a vote immediately after the next policy committee meeting. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Kara, we have somebody online as well.
We do. Donna Ingram.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me. Donna Ingram, she, her. I don't have as much of an eloquent presentation because I just found out about this situation about 5 minutes ago. I'm with Keep Local School Foundations, and many of you have heard from me in the past. This is really surprising to us because we had been working with Reform PPS over the summer and at the end of a school year and having really wonderful and productive conversations. And to find out that the committee chair requested a proposal, days before school started and didn't bother to include us in this conversation is very disappointing. We want to work together. We want to come up with a plan that works well for everybody in the district, but this is not how it's done. We need to work together in a committee. We need to work together in groups, and we need to work together in public so that we can find something that works for everyone. We want this to work out, and we know that really smart planning, including really smart communication with parents and donors across the district, is key. Throwing out a proposal at the last minute that doesn't have identifiable targets or goals does not do that. It does not build trust with parents who are struggling to trust the district. It does not build trust with me, who's struggling to work on this project as well. I really hope that everyone takes the time to consider slowing this process down so all of the key stakeholders can be at the table and have their voice heard. I'm happy to talk to any board members. I've already talked to many of you, and I really appreciate your time and your efforts. And I hope that you'll keep considering involving everybody in this process. Thank you so much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for
Thank
showing
you.
up today.
Please public comment.
So
Can I just make a note? We can look into the question later. I noticed that the proposal submitted contemplates the establishment of a district-wide foundation, which I thought we'd worked really hard over the last couple of years to launch the fund, which is aimed at gathering philanthropic funds and could serve as for that. But that's for whatever the next discussion is, I guess.
So because we had a consolidated end of the meeting, I didn't have a chance to, in the other business, I was going to mention that there had been a proposal sent in, and to everybody, it got sent to everybody at the same, I saw at the same time it got sent to the other committee members and Jonathan Garcia. And as with anything, we'll have a full public discussion of it. I will say this has been going on the conversations have been going on for 5 years, and we've had, as Director DePass knows, the engagement. Director Hollins recommended a lot of people to be engaged, recommended people to be part of the engagement. So this isn't a surprise. The topic is not as surprising that it's still happening. And we also, using our racial equity policy, tried to center the voices that would not normally be part of the conversation, so that we have from them. And I expect we'll hear from anybody else, but this is just a starting. There's been no commitments made to move anything or move a particular policy, but it's going to be on the agenda this year.
May I say that I heard that you'd like this to be on a schedule, and I have a problem with that as well. This needs to be done well. We do have timelines proposed, but I would like to. I'm very glad the second person showed up to testify.
So just for its worth, there's been no agreement on a schedule.
I want to finish talking. We need to make sure that everyone's at the table, it needs to be at the table for this conversation and that we don't rush through it. That's just a suggestion. That's
So
just me
thank you for
talking.
Director Pass. I don't think in anything in my comments, I said there was going to be a schedule. I said it's going to be on the schedule for the committee this year. So I
I'm
didn't
just saying
say,
that I would like to make sure that we have both sides of the table.
yes,
It's important and it's important to do it well
and
versus fast.
that's my intention. And also I'm going to follow the racial equity policy of elevating those voices of people who wouldn't normally have a place at the table. And as I said, all of our discussions are going to happen in public meetings. And the last conversation that was referenced actually was not a public meeting that happened in the parking lot. And our meetings are going to be transparent and everything else. Like I say, the committee members and Jonathan got the proposal at the same time. And I would just also ask Superintendent Carrera, the Fund for Public Schools, that they provide a lot more information, because if that is our fund, then we should have access to their financials and how they operate. But right now we don't have that. So as part of the discussion, we'll include that as part of the discussion, but there's no intent to ram anything through. I think you saw last time we spent a whole year discussing it, and lots of people had an opportunity to speak up. And we did hear from also those who, in a very deliberate way, from those who don't often have an opportunity to.
And I'd encourage us to do more of that. So thank you.
Okay, with that, we're adjourned.
And we're gonna be set up in the last conference room.
Is this meeting gonna be here? Is the work session here?
Yes.
Okay.
Is that okay? Oh, great.